E vamos então iniciar a nossa sessão com uma visão transversal daquilo que tem sido os desafios e as oportunidades relacionadas com a transformação digital na administração pública. E para iniciarmos, vamos ter uma entrevista com o nosso analista responsável pelo nosso research para a área de Government Insights na IDC, que vai comentar e partilhar connosco a sua visão sobre as principais tendências que vão moldar e que vão influenciar aquilo que serão os investimentos e a forma de transformação na administração pública na Europa. Inicio aqui com o nosso FutureScape global, com as Top 10 Predictions para a administração pública central, onde vemos aqui, enfim, vários temas e seguindo a lógica e aquelas três variáveis-chave, ou seja, o tempo em que consideramos que cada um dos temas serão relevantes, ou a variável no eixo vertical, a complexidade e o custo associado para lidar com cada uma delas, e depois o impacto que cada uma delas tem no mercado e a respectiva numeração. E, portanto, temos temas relacionados com a manipulação de informação nesse contexto digital, as fake news. Portanto, esse é um tema crítico que está na agenda dos nossos governos, na Europa principalmente, mas não só. Depois temos outros temas mais específicos relacionados com novas formas de trabalho, como é que a inteligência artificial vai, no fundo, mudar a forma, os processos e a forma como se trabalha na administração pública, e depois toda a automação e a nova forma de entregar os serviços aos utentes, e depois outros temas mais técnicos relacionados com a adoção da cloud, como é que se gere e como é que se garante a segurança num mundo multi-cloud, e depois outros temas relacionados com a segurança e com a privacidade da informação, e até mesmo temas relacionados com contratos inteligentes, aquilo que chamamos smart contracts, com base em tecnologia blockchain. Portanto, há aqui uma panóplia de temas muito distintos, mas ninguém melhor do que Joe Deegan, e vou passar para inglês. Joe Deegan is our Research Director for Government Insights. Joe is leading all the research we are doing related to government and how public administration is dealing with all these changes in the context of this pandemic, but especially these changes related to this new digital economy and all the aspects related to sustainability that we are dealing today. So, Joe, thank you very much for being with us today. It's great to have you here. I just shared the FutureScape for national governments, and we saw that we have topics from fake news and dealing with the manipulation of the information to more specific topics like moving to cloud and using AI to transform the way public services are delivered. So this is our vision at worldwide level. Do you want to comment and share your vision about these trends specifically in Europe?
Certainly, and thank you for having me, Gabriel. I picked out a few of the metrics that came out of the IDC FutureScape 2021. And I wanted to see what is everyone trying to do in the European public sector, particularly post-COVID. Well, we're not post-COVID yet, but we're hoping to get there. I sort of divided them up into employee and customer focus and also operating model focus. It's probably no great surprise, but 57%, so the majority of European public sector, is now desperately trying to work out how we can actually work from home and work from home successfully and securely with the correct privacy, etc. So this is probably the biggest change since the year before. But at the same time, 26% are looking to improve or increase their customer service. There's always been the holy grail in public sector is a single view of a citizen from government, but equally a single view of government for the citizen. So given the current situation, there is a huge interest in creating a better customer engagement model, and that includes commerce support for things like the reanimation funding that's coming through for businesses. And there will need to be expanded online digital self-service. And if we switch over to the operating model focus, 44% of government agencies are looking at their business continuity, which has obviously been affected drastically in the last year, and also disaster recovery. I mean, this is one pandemic. We hope it doesn't happen again, but basically we never know. And this has really been a sort of an accelerator for government to actually look at how they can revamp future ability to respond to this type of scenario. Equally, 43% of governments are looking at their operating models, and particularly the need to be digitally enabled for more automation and contactless solutions with the concomitant transparency and greater trust that we actually can bring to those. 13% are looking at supply chain. The supply chain needs to be more diversified. Again, it's been found to have broken during this current scenario. So a greater ability to adapt and be agile within the supply chain is seen to be something that's necessary in the future. And again, 13% are also looking at their use of data and analytics, and then using artificial intelligence and machine learning as a sort of central aid to better adjustments to drastic changes. There's a huge need for the ability to synthesize information points into a more narrative approach. My own particular expertise is around smart cities, and what we actually see happening there is that we are creating huge buckets, huge amounts of data through these sort of IoT platforms that we are producing. But data is pretty meaningless, it's just data. So we need to turn that data into information, and then we need to be able to visualize that information so that make it accessible. And then we've got to actually see what the impact is going to be. So we're beginning to get this kind of a continuum of data into information, into insight, which allows us to have impact. This is where governments are focusing currently. Well, that transcribes into sort of in terms of technology, is that we already have the sensor technologies and the IoT platforms that are producing the data. We have things like digital twins, which are virtual representations of infrastructure, which allows us to do the scenario planning and actually make this data actually accessible and visual. But we are missing to a large extent the data exchange piece that would sit in the middle of this, which would be powered by data trust model. And there's a huge focus globally on how we create the right governance and data trust models to allow us to take data from different sources and then mesh it together to create more of a narrative. So if we are looking at things like well-being, health, harmony, we need data from transport, we need it from health, we need it from hospitals, we need that all together in one place, which is where these data exchanges are beginning to create. And then on the final part of that continuum, so data exchange, digital twins, right at the other end, we have a sort of real focus on creating new ROI models that allow us to actually prove what success would look like within digital transformation. By that, I mean that we currently use things like IRR and net present value and cost-benefit analysis, etc. But they're very, very blunt instruments, and they don't actually tell us what we need to know, particularly under a lot of the stimulus money that's beginning to appear under the green infrastructure approach. It's how do we actually create new ROI models that not only is something that we can use when we've actually completed a project to see if it's been successful, but to build the internal business case that allows us to make a decision to invest in these arenas. We need these new ROI models, and they are beginning to come through. So up until now, what's been missing through the COVID piece, if we take the sort of digital administration, digital public services, and digital economy as like three rows, if you can imagine them, we've actually had a number of things that were already underway. So making data-driven decision for optimal resource allocation and waste reduction, scalable, resilient infrastructure, safeguarding for data volumes, enabling data sharing to ensure that citizens only need to submit data once. That's incredibly important. But the actual COVID piece has brought more things into the mix. So the sort of omni-experience concept of being able to work anywhere, anytime. When I was younger, we used to call it the martini approach, which was anytime, any place, anywhere. So access to information systems during home office working, scaling up the digital channels to be able to spikes to meet demand, shortening timelines to enable new digital channels are coming forward. And a few years back, there was a great deal of talk about BYOD, bring your own device. In fact, I've actually heard it described as, in those days, as bring your own disaster. But it's a kind of, again, come very much to the fore as to how do we actually manage to do this in a secure environment. So COVID has brought many new things into the existing set of aspirations for digital government. There's three sort of areas that are important where you should be considering to direct your resources. So the first is actually getting ready to use functional business process architecture in place. The second, which is almost like a direction of travel, an unstoppable direction of travel really, is the use of cloud, or more generally scalable and reliable infrastructure. The scalable bit, massively important. And the third area where people are actually addressing their resources is Devops, which is the mix between software and operations, or more plainly, advanced capabilities for iterative change. So if we think about those three buckets, the DevOps, the cloud, and the functional business process architecture, they have massive effect on different areas of what we were describing before, of areas that we are underway in terms of focus and new areas that are coming in. So for example, cloud goes under can actually have an effect on the omni-experience piece, where we have access to information systems that are scalable and are secure, and then shorten timelines for new digital channels for engagement, both with the citizens, but also internal engagement for the workforce itself. Again, it has big effect on the ability for BYOD to work and connectivity to work from home, and the scalable resilient infrastructure to safeguard against increased data volumes, and also the embracing of stakeholder and open innovation. If we look at the DevOps piece, it actually helps with the agile cooperation across ministries, agencies, and service delivery partners, at the same time as scaling up of digital channels and embracing multi-stakeholder open innovation, but also things like crowdsourcing from citizens, civil servants, and service delivery partners. The functional business process architecture piece really fits under the sort of information bucket and has a huge effect on making data-driven decisions for optimal resource correct, enabling data sharing and improving data transparency and openness to enhance trust and usage. But it also goes into this sort of agile cooperation across ministries and service delivery partners. So those three areas are the areas that we can almost overlay across all the trends that are happening across government currently. That was the bit on the actual sort of, the FutureScape itself. But I was going to make some sort of personal reflections of having worked for 30 years in digital transformation within government and actually as on the vendor side as well. One of the most important things we've got to look at is not just looking at technology. So I always ask myself the question when we're considering doing something is, if technology is the answer, what was the question? Because technology is not an answer, it's a facilitator. The biggest difficulty, the technology part of the equation is usually the simplest part of the equation. It's something that we can do. I kind of refer to it as plumbing. It's basically plumbing, and we can do plumbing. The biggest difficulty we have is changing people's behaviors. And so the behavioral part of this is massively important. So whenever we're thinking about something, if someone says technology is the answer, then we've probably got the question wrong in the first place. So we actually move on to, people think this is, go on.
No, I was just to comment. No, I was just to comment that it's interesting this view of where you see the need to prove the return on investment, to prove the return on investment, and the way to do this is to make the right questions of how. What needs to be done, and then just after this to understand how technology can be part of the solution. But the first phase would be to understand the problem and to understand how to deal with it, and then of course introduce the technology. But it's interesting to also see that topics like cloud and DevOps are in the government agendas. Cloud for sure, we have been seeing this transition and new strategies from governments to define how they are going to the cloud. And in Portugal, the Portuguese government just defined the cloud strategy a few months ago. So it's going quite fast now. So it started very slow, but now it's getting started. But then the DevOps side is something that we are not seeing yet. We're seeing some organizations, public organizations, but few of them are dealing with DevOps. And it's really related to the way, I would say, startups or organizations that are really focusing on innovation have to move, because if you need DevOps to have innovation, and it's what I understood from you, that the governments need to, also to apply the DevOps mode and to innovate fast as the private sector. So, but it's difficult because the government sector have different rules, the bureaucracy, so the DevOps model and the innovation is not something that's really related to government. Could you develop a little bit more your vision for digital innovation in public administration? What would be the key areas and how they would do it?
Well, I mean, your comments, I entirely agree with, and actually they flag up a major issue within public sector, which is the procurement process. We have a procurement process that to a very large extent is broken. It's a gladiatorial process in which internally an RFI is developed, and then it's put out to the vendor community, and then it may be or may not be actually procured at some point in the future. Usually the process takes anything from 18 months to longer. And by the time it's actually procured, it's pretty much out of date anyway. So we have a public sector procurement process which is broken. But the smartest cities and the smartest sort of areas I've seen in the world have recognized this. And there's more of a sort of challenge-based procurement situation beginning to appear. We have something in the UK called SBRI, which is Small Business Research and Innovation Procurement, and it's beginning to become more mainstream. And what that is an iterative process. So instead of going out with a huge RFI saying we're going to do this over 10 years and it's going to cost X million euros or whatever, they start with, this is a challenge we have, and then they put it out into the market. And they take in sort of 2-page proposals from both small and medium enterprises and large organizations as to how they would address this problem. They then pick, say, 10, and they put a small amount of money in, say 50,000 euros or something. And then when it comes back, they look at the results, and then they adapt the actual questions and the scope, and then they put it out again to, say, 10. And then it comes back again, and then they decide on, this is what we want to buy because it actually gives us the outcomes we're looking for. And they pick 3, and then one of the 3 wins. And this sort of dynamic iterative process, as opposed to the big bang concept of public sector procurement as we currently have it, is much, much more successful. The way we have it at the moment doesn't work, and what we actually are procuring is the lowest common denominator at the lowest price. It's not something you or I would do personally, by which I mean we would never buy something the lowest common denominator and the lowest price. We would want the best value, and we want it to do what we wanted it to do, which is why this sort of challenge-based procurement is beginning to work. So what I've noticed within cities, particularly in my field of the smart cities bit, is that there are some who are creating special purpose vehicles that sit outside of government, and that allows them to be slightly more agile. And this agility allows them to be able to do this sort of challenge-based procurement process. And I think, in terms of places, I'm aware you have something like Digital Porto. They would be a perfect agency for doing this kind of activity. But if you look at the city of Vienna, they have a special purpose vehicle called TINA, T-I-N-A. And what it does is it sits slightly outside of the city administration, but it has the ability to act like an overarching, almost like a Sauron Eye from Lord of the Rings. Because what it can say is, no, Mrs. Transport, you can't do that unless it actually integrates with Mr. Education over here. So it has this sort of overview and allows for greater coordination and collaboration between the usual big beast agencies that normally procure their own activities. So this move towards challenge-based procurement, iterative procurement, and more agile procurement is a direction of travel that I think that we're going to go have more of in the future. I don't know if that actually helps.
No, it's very interesting.
But also, I think.
No, I was saying it's very interesting this change. Do you see this? We don't have too much more time. I think we have 5 minutes, but it's interesting how to see that how cities are moving to this new way of dealing with this kind of procurement, to be more agile and to integrate a little bit better all the pieces from the cities. Do you see it at a national level? Somehow some countries trying to do it. What's your opinion about this? Just to close.
Yeah, I mean, there are. I've done a lot of work with islands, including Portuguese islands, in fact. And they have the ability to be able to do this because they're obviously smaller. But if you look at some countries such as Holland, I mean, there's only 16 million people in the whole of Holland. Or you look at Lebanon, there's only 5 million people in the whole of Lebanon. Or I come from Scotland, there's only 5 million people in Scotland. They had the ability to map against countries such as Estonia, which I think is got like about 2 million people. It's more difficult at scale and at national level. But for example, with digital twins, a digital twin allows you to do scenario planning without actually having to build things, etc. So The digital twin came out of the sort of building information management systems, but now they're being used for whole cities, areas and cities, and now they're actually being mapped up to the level of a whole country. So the UK is creating a digital twin of the whole country. I used to be I was the IoT special advisor to the island of Jersey. And my interest in islands, as I said, was they are smaller, and so you can actually try a lot of things in it. So we created an IoT platform across the whole of the island of Jersey. And we created a digital twin of the island of Jersey. If you wanted to do a planning application for a building in Jersey, you have to do it in 3D, and it drops directly into the model. So there is this ability to do things at a national level. Indeed, IDC ran a digital twins seminar at the Eurasian conference last week, the week before. And what Kazakhstan is looking to do is create a digital twin of the whole of the country. So it is, this sort of thinking can be scaled up to a national level. But what actually people find it incredibly difficult because it just seems so damn complicated. But you can actually take it down to a very, very simplistic concept. So I've got a 4-point plan. This is how it works. To make this work, you have to create an innovation group that can deal with wicked problems. But by that, I mean, if you just deal with systems of integrators, they'll tell you it's all about connectivity. If you deal with utility companies, it's all about energy amelioration. If you deal with transport companies, it's all about transport. Everybody comes at this from their own comfort zone. So you have to create a group that, you need anthropologists, you need ethnographers, you need designers, you need urban designers, you need tech leads, you need data scientists. Create that group that actually does not come from a comfort zone, that can actually look at a wicked problem in a different way. And then you show through use cases what people would do differently if the investment was made. And there you start looking at things like circular economy, for waste disposal. And then you've got to be able to measure the difference so you can improve the ROI. And then you reinvest that ROI in solving other wicked problems. So that's an incredibly simplistic 4-point plan to do something incredibly complicated. But it works.
Very interesting, Joe, very interesting. We could have been here for 1 hour or 2 talking about this, but I think it was a great conversation to understand how these trends that are happening at worldwide level are impacting Europe, and then to see how governments at local or national level need to innovate and really apply these tools or these methodologies or these principles that we talk about Devops and using cloud to really create a way to plan better, based on scenarios where you can see what happens before investing and then maximize at the maximum the investment you need to do. So I think it was a great conversation. Great to have you here in our FutureScape. I hope soon to have you again in another IDC Portugal event, but not digitally, but in Portugal, in Lisbon or Porto or other city. So thank you very much, Joe. It was a great pleasure to have you here.
My great pleasure. My great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye then.